time for Tailgate's Game of the Week. This week, it's Texas versus Michigan. Grab a drink and join the conversation.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us. I'm joined here with Darren from Darren Talks Ball. Thanks again, man, for joining us today and to talk a little bit about this upcoming game that you got. That's arguably an awesome out-of-conference game that two great teams scheduled, and I applaud you guys for scheduling. But Texas and Michigan.
It feels weird. It feels strange. Honestly, it's a strange new world for Michigan fans playing such a big matchup in week 2 of the regular season. In case anyone out there is not familiar, Michigan has not played the strongest out-of-conference schedule for the past several seasons, but I'm excited. I love college football. As you know, on my channel, Darren Talks Ball, we cover all things Big Ten. So I just love college football in general. Of course, I'm a Michigan fan first and foremost. That's why I'm here, and I'm really thankful you guys have me on. But I'm super excited. It should be a really interesting matchup. Not as confident as I would like to be in my team heading into this one, but
fair enough.
I think the one thing to kind of put it into perspective a little bit right away is, as we all know, sometimes in college football, teams can have sloppy weeks and weeks where they don't necessarily show up and then turn up at the utmost with the utmost intensity the very next week. So these teams change a lot week to week, and I'm excited because I do think it will be a closer game than what some people may expect. So
and I agree. I agree with that. I think it's hard to look at your season opener and go, oh yeah, so this is exactly how both of these teams are going to play for the rest of the year, especially against another bigger opponent. One thing I will say about the season opener, I was surprised to see Warren took as many snaps as he did, considering all the noise for Orji we heard in the offseason. So do you think that they're going to reverse the roles a little bit for this next game, or is this a dual QB strategy that Michigan's trying to do, or to keep kind of like their opponents on their heels? Or do you think that we just saw the guy that secured the role? Like what are your thoughts on that entire quarterback battle?
No, it's a really, really interesting. One thing that I really had hope for, honestly, when Sharon Moore became the head coach of the University of Michigan, is that maybe we get a little more info on what's really going on with the team. Of course, anyone who knows and is familiar with this program under Jim Harbaugh, it was kind of like the submarine effect or whatever they like to call it. They don't really like to post a lot on social media or make big announcements. Of course, the announcement about who the starter was going to be was never made official. We just kind of got who ended up coming out there and getting first team reps in this last game, and that was Davis Warren. And then it obviously came out later in the press conference after the game. Sharon Moore gave his line of thinking as to giving Davis Warren, former walk-on, great story with the kid, a leukemia survivor and all that. As to why he got first team reps in this one. But as to what might happen in this Texas game, like you said, Alex Orji did get some snaps. Somebody a couple weeks ago in the Michigan circle, I think it was Isaiah Hole or somebody at a press conference, asked Sharon Moore about the running the old Chris Leak, Tim Tebow kind of style situation there with rotating Alex Orji in more as a power runner and then going back to your passer. And he kind of alluded to maybe doing that a little bit, but then kind of also walked it back. So I'm kind of at the point after that game on Saturday night where they did a lot of rotating at a lot of positions that didn't make any sense to me, where I'm like, I don't know. JJ McCarthy could somehow rip up his NFL contract and come back and announce that he's using the rest of his college eligibility at this point, or they may roll out the freshman out there. To be honest with you, I have no idea, no insider intel, but I would say this. I was a big Alex Orji guy coming into the season, and that was because of the plus athleticism that he has and ability to run the football. And I was honestly a little concerned and disappointed when I heard that Davis Warren was able to take the job from him, because I know the ceiling to Davis Warren is honestly probably a B to B plus version of everything JJ McCarthy did. And if you're just a B to B plus version of JJ McCarthy, to be fair and not to disparage the young man too much, I think this is kind of like an average college quarterback. So we're going to kind of see heading into Texas what Michigan can do with a great defense and potentially a great running game. Khalil Mullings was one bright spot against Fresno State this last week, but with an average college quarterback and maybe rotating Alex Orji in. So
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's kind of a long-winded answer to your question there.
No,
but it's really tough to suss out, because I think a lot of us were like, Alex Orji, let's roll with this guy. He could be kind of Jalen Milroe light, and now we suddenly got Davis Warren, who is your prototypical pro-style quarterback. So
yeah, well, and I saw the stuff that I've seen from Orji, like he feels like he's still pretty rough, but he's got as we were talking about, like he's got a much higher skill ceiling. So because of his raw talent, he's got a much higher skill ceiling, like a Milroe or whatnot. And yeah, it just the stuff that I did get to see from the season opener, because unfortunately I can't watch every game, but I did watch some of the Michigan game.
Hey, I hear you. I don't have the money for that multiple TV setup.
I know, right?
Out there. Like, where are you getting this money for 8 TVs? How do you have room for all of them? Yeah.
I mean, exactly. I've got room for it. I don't have the money for it. So, but yeah. So I was just like, but when I would see him, I'm like, he's clearly one of those people that there are sometimes he's shining, and then other times it's like, okay, you can tell he's a little rough. And I wonder if that was just like, the snaps that he took was more or less just to help get him comfortable in the game setting, because it is such a different thing taking snaps at fall camp than it is, even your spring game, like than actually playing in a game with a crowd of 100,000 plus people and stuff like that. And you're talking a ruckus crowd next week. Like it's going to be insane. And I think that's one of the things that's helping you guys, that'll help you guys is that Texas has to come to you. And that might put them a little bit more on their heels, because that's a tough environment to play in. You know, it's called the Big House for a reason.
It's tougher than some people give credit to too. I know it's not exactly the loudest environment. Shout out to Fieldy Yost back in the day for having the most mundane stadium design of all time, and not really putting anything on there to keep the noise in. But I don't think they were thinking about that back in the day either. But it is a place where Michigan's been very successful over the past 3 years. I don't think they've lost a home game, I'm trying to think, since the COVID season. And of course, we all know they've been 40-3 for the last 3 seasons. They've been one of the better teams in college football. But of course, this is, from what we saw Saturday night, probably an entirely different team, to be honest, too.
Sure.
So.
Well, and I mean, you guys, out of most, especially all the top tier FBS teams, you guys probably lost the most amount of players. Aside from maybe even FSU, but I'm pretty sure, I think you guys have last I checked, it was like 36% returning production.
Yeah, I think speaking of FSU, I know this because returning production is a key metric in my Darren's Power Index that I do every season. And I think it's 37% returning production for FSU and 36 for Michigan. And I think only one returning starter along the offense, who was another bright spot. I'd say if you're going to take anything positive away from Saturday night, it would be Khalil Mullings and Colston Loveland. I think Colston Loveland was like 8 or 9 receptions for 90 yards and a touchdown. Probably the best tight end in college football. So looking forward to that matchup against Texas. I don't know if Texas necessarily has the linebackers or the safeties to match up with Colston Loveland, who is possibly maybe his ceiling. I know he's going to be a first round pick. His ceiling, it might sound crazy to say, is the next Travis Kelce or George Kittle from everything we've seen so far. He is that type of tight end. Maybe not necessarily as great of an inline blocker, but you want to talk about a guy with size and length and also athleticism and speed. He's really a wide receiver. He was a wide receiver in high school that blew up to like 6'6", and they're like, okay, now you're a tight end.
That's exactly where he needs to be too. And I mean, to be fair, like Texas did struggle last year in the secondary. So, and I mean, they returned a ton of production this year. I think they were in top 30 or something like that of all teams.
Yeah, I think they were too, 71% or something like that.
And so they were one of the top. They were one of the top guys in the SEC that returned production. And so I don't know I don't know how much they've improved in the secondary, because unfortunately CSU didn't really test that. CSU is a decent team, but they were just outgunned, completely outgunned. And so it's one of those things, like I am interested to see how that, like, because it really did feel a lot like Michigan was kind of one-sided on the offensive side. And maybe, and again, that could just be, they're just trying to find their targets downfield. And they know their running backs are good. Like they know their running game is going to be strong. And so like it'll be interesting to see if they can find that groove. Because again, I feel like if there is a weakness in Texas's defense, it's probably going to be that secondary. And so if there's anything that you can, especially looking back at the previous game, because we've played one game.
Do we have to look back at that game?
No, it's just an example of like just thinking through that and thinking about this upcoming game. What do you think are going to be your key takeaways that are going to be like, this is what we're going to have to do to be successful, especially going into a matchup with an even more physical team like Texas that's got a deeper roster than Fresno State. So what do you think are going to be your key takeaways of like, this is what we're going to have to do to win, or at least put out a phenomenal showing?
Well, I think as any Michigan fan would know, and as other college football fans out there should know by now, if you go all the way back through the Jim Harbaugh years, and even before that, if I'm being honest, this program has really lived and died by how well the offensive line performed. That's kind of always been Michigan's identity. Michigan has certain, I don't want to say restrictions because that makes it sound like it's coming from somewhere else, but being kind of like the hoity-toity, higher level academic school, they don't always get all the big 5-star recruits. There's, speaking of Texas, Michigan actually had Xavier Worthy committed at one point and then he flipped to Texas. So there's plenty. And I think Ethan Burke is on Texas's roster currently, who was also at one time a Michigan commit. So it seems like every time we play a big matchup with a big school, we get matched up with a team that has a number of former Michigan commits that were like, wait, if I go to Michigan, I'm going to have to actually study? No, F that. But no, because it's more of an academic school, and because they just kind of, they always recruit the 4-star guys just fine. And they're not able to load their roster up with 5 stars. The 2021 class that just most of them just went on to the NFL was kind of an anomaly for that with JJ McCarthy and Dono and all that. But this offensive line is really the key, I think. There are several guys along the offensive line. Giovanni El-Hadi was a former top 100 recruit from the Detroit area. Greg Crippen played center at IMG Academy in high school, which is, IMG Academy, everybody knows. There's a lot of talent there, but it's got to mesh. And, of course, they've replaced all 5 starters from last season who are now in the NFL in one way or another. Some of them are just on practice squads, but I digress. So it's really got to start and end with that offensive line, because what I saw from Davis Warren at times was promising. He made some good throws, especially to Colston Loveland, but there were also times where he kind of looked lost out there, and it looked like he wasn't entirely confident yet. There was a big 3rd and 8, I believe, where he had Dono swinging out into the flat. And he had kind of a mesh concept or crossing routes going on. I haven't gotten to watch do the film review yet, but he had Tyler Morris like 8 yards deep coming across the field wide open because the safety and the corner were paying all their attention to Donovan Edwards, and he flipped it out to Donovan Edwards for like a 2-yard loss. That kind of stuff happened a lot in that game. So you're going to have to get the running game going. And I don't know. I've heard a lot of people on the Michigan side of things are like, oh, Texas doesn't have their big defensive tackles from last season. They lost some key pieces from that defense. We should be able to run on them. But it took a long time in that Fresno State game for Michigan to get their running game going. It was interesting that they kind of switched from running Donovan Edwards to Khalil Mullings, and that's when it finally got going. And then Fresno State was like the 94th ranked run defense in the country last season. So I'm worried. I don't know if you can kind of see the paleness in my face as we talk about this game. Now that I think about it, I do live in Michigan. We don't get the sun up here like you guys do in SEC country. But no, I turned a ghost white towards the end of that game right before Will Johnson got the pick 6 to kind of seal it. But that's the one thing I look for in basically any Michigan game. I want to see the offensive line play and get movement and get to the second level and get that running game going, because everything with Michigan is based off of that. That's where you get your play action passes. That's where you get your more complicated looks off of the run game working. Can they do it against Texas? They still have some talented guys. I just mentioned Ethan Burke a second ago. They don't have Devondre Sweat anymore, who was, I think, one of PFF's highest graded defensive tackles. So it'll be interesting. I assume Texas still has some talented players along that defensive front, though, because they're at the school that does recruit incredibly well. So,
sure. Well, and it's hard to tell what their run defense is going to look like, considering the fact that again, they played CSU. CSU has a decent running back, but again, there's just two different leagues. And so, yeah, it's hard to gauge that. And if you just go by a box score, it's not really going to tell you the entire story. And that's the case for the Michigan game. Like, it's the box score doesn't tell you everything. Because it's not really going play by play or anything like that to really show you the intricacies of what's actually happening on the field. So I think it's going to be an awesome game. That's why we got it as our game of the week. I think it's going to be a ton of fun to watch. I think it's going to be incredibly competitive. And I mean, what we hope is it's not just some defensive slugfest like Notre Dame and Texas A&M.
No,
we hope that there's some offense.
maybe this is like some cultural difference here between Big Ten and SEC, but I love a good defensive slugfest. But maybe I'm a sicko for college football. I don't know.
So Luke, our other co-host, he loves it too. And the thing is, like, I don't dislike it. It's just when you have teams that are known for their offense going into a game, and like Notre Dame's not necessarily known for their offense, but Texas A&M was consistently getting their offensive prowess propped up before the game. So you're like, oh, well, maybe they're going to be pretty good. And then it just turned out to be like the Connor Wegman's terrible show. And so it's just like, we're not to get onto them or talk about them too much, but it's one of those things like I want to be able to see Texas run at the firepower that they're supposed to run at, just like I want to see Michigan run it. And
there are
and
certain brands.
Kind,
I would be a little disappointed if like LSU and USC tonight. We're recording this on Sunday night, so just to let everybody know, this is pre-recorded or whatever. But it would be a little disappointing if USC LSU ends up being like 13-7. Yeah, that's true. I guess the brands kind of anchor your expectations. Like, when I watch Iowa Wisconsin, I'm like, I'm here for Iowa Wisconsin. If this thing doesn't end in 10-7 on a last-second field goal, we riot. But
and arguably even the game, like you guys, like you and Ohio State are usually like they're usually a little bit more defensive teams. So having a lower scoring game in those is somewhat more fun. If you've got a game that feels more like a blowout, it's less fun for both teams.
True.
And so I get it. I totally understand, but you're correct. There is definitely a cultural difference there too. And I mean, even those cultural lines even exist in the SEC to some degree, because Nick Saban loved the ground and pound, slow attrition type stuff. And he had to adapt to the high fly, crazy offensive type, and he didn't like it. So, anyways, well, Darren, thank you so much for joining us to talk about this game of the week with us and everything like that. Where can everybody find you?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. It's just at Darren Talks Ball on YouTube. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm a Michigan guy through and through, but we cover the entirety of the Big Ten. Got a big preview and prediction video out for USC LSU, but as I say it, you probably aren't going to be interested in watching that anymore because that game would have already happened. But I do have lots of videos coming out pretty much on the daily. We do a live stream every Thursday, by the way, called This Week in Big Ten Football, where we talk about the conference as a whole. And I also do episodes that premiere each Wednesday night called This Week in Michigan Football, covering Michigan specifically. So you can find that all at Darren Talks Ball on YouTube. And that's the only place I'm at, honestly. I got off of X. Best decision of my life. My mental health is through the roof. I don't have to deal with Ohio State fans complaining about counter stallions anymore. It is beautiful. My life is so outside of my toddler. My life is so quiet. And honestly, dealing with my toddler, much easier than dealing with Ohio State fans this time of year.
Well, it's a good thing Luke's not on here.
I forgot. Yeah, he's a Buckeye fan. Oh man.
No, it's all good. He takes those in stride. Well, again, thanks again, Darren, for joining us tonight and talking the game through. And good luck to you guys. And again, we look forward to having you on in the future.
Yeah, looking forward to it anytime, man. Just hit me up.